How's the morning going so far? Did you enjoy that first panel? Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I promise you that with our speaker and next two panels, you will enjoy the rest of our morning and afternoon here.
How are you? I made it just on time.
Doing fine. Well, let me just begin. I am going to go ahead and introduce our panel, our keynote speaker. I would ask that everyone take their seats, or for those of you that are leaving, if you could go ahead and go. Okay, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce a lifelong public service servant who has dedicated more than half of her life to diplomacy. The Honorable Assistant Secretary Linda Thomas Greenfield has over 34 years of experience in the U.S. Foreign Service. Assistant Secretary Thomas Greenfield's diplomatic assignments have included service in Liberia, Pakistan, Kenya, Gambia, Nigeria, Jamaica, as well as postings at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations in Switzerland. In the U.S., Ambassador Thomas Greenfield served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. She served as Director General of the Foreign Service and is currently the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of African Affairs since 2013. As Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, she leads the implementation of the Obama administration's policies towards sub-Saharan Africa. This morning, she will address infrastructure development in key sectors such as health, education, and other key sectors. I will tell you that just a few weeks ago, I was in Liberia, and as the former ambassador from the U.S. to Liberia, she is still a rock star in Liberia. And as a matter of fact, I think she's the first diplomat. Is it a school?
Yes.
There is the Linda Thomas Greenfield School in Liberia. We do need to give her a round of applause for that. I had the honor of meeting with the president of Liberia, and she couldn't stop talking about the former ambassador. So let me ask you to please join me in welcoming Assistant Secretary Linda Thomas Greenfield.
Thank you. Good morning. And let me start by thanking Congresswoman Bass for the kind introduction. But more than thanking her for the introduction, I want to also thank her for her commitment to Africa. She has been a stalwart for us throughout her tenure in the Congress, and she set a great example for all of us. But most importantly, Congresswoman, you've set an example for Africans. You've set an example for them, and I think a commitment that shows to Africa our strong commitment and support for Africa in the administration. So let me take this opportunity to thank you in front of your brain trust. Now, I just referred to you as her brain trust, but I also have to tell you that you are my brain trust because we don't do Africa policy in a vacuum. It's not Linda sitting at her desk looking at papers and deciding what we are going to do from one moment to the next on the continent of Africa. It is because of your advocacy, your support, your insisting that we focus on issues that we might not focus on, to be very frank with you. It's having a Congresswoman who is staying on top of us, who's getting out in the field and seeing what is going on, and calling me and others up to say, what are you doing? And why are you not doing? And I appreciate that. There's nothing that helps me more as Assistant Secretary than have you call me with critical concerns. And I notice I said critical concerns, not criticism. It's your critical concerns that let us know the issues that we need to be focusing on as we move forward on our policy in Africa. So again, let me welcome all of you here and thank all of you for all of your support that you give to the continent of Africa and you give to me and my team as we look to develop our policies. I always remind myself when I start a speech, what are we doing on the continent of Africa? And I always, as an ambassador to Liberia, we always had a mission. And in Liberia, our mission was, we are here to help the people of Liberia to succeed. And that meant everybody, from the gardeners to the ambassador. Everything we did every day was about helping the people of Liberia to succeed. On the continent of Africa, we're partnering with Africa to support democracy, peace, and prosperity. And that includes practically everything we do on the continent you can put in the category of democracy, peace, and prosperity. So the theme of this year's Brain Trust, U.S. policy in the next administration, I think is extraordinarily timely, and it's quite appropriate for us to be looking at. We have about 4 months left in the administration. And as I told the group at Constituency for Africa that Mel hosted yesterday, our foot is on the pedal. We are moving at an extraordinary speed, not to get to the end of the administration, but to get things done before the end of the administration. And so we're moving at an extraordinarily fast pace. But as we're moving at a pace to accomplish the things we need to accomplish at the end, we also have to start to think about and put in writing our recommendations for the next administration on U.S. Africa policy. And I'm thrilled to see that that's the focus of this program today. Yesterday, the Constituency for Africa had an extraordinary event where they looked at various areas, democracy and governance, nutrition, health, investments, and made recommendations for the next administration. I didn't realize that that was exactly what was being done until I came in the room. And I realized how important it was for me to participate in that. And Mel, I did take all of the recommendations that were made that day, passed it to my team that's working on our transition papers, and we are putting those into our thinking. And so anything that you come out of these discussions as well, please convey those to us. It's important for us to take into account your thinking as we're moving forward. The first thing that I want to note as we start to prepare for the next administration is that Africa has always had bipartisan support. Whatever administration comes to power, we know that they're going to face the same central challenges that the previous administration faced. And our commitment to Africa, as I noted, has remained steadfast, and it's always been bipartisan. And so we've continued many important initiatives that were started by prior administrations, and we expect that the next administration will continue with some of the key priorities that were started by the Obama administration. But as we start to think about what are the top challenges that will need the focus and the attention of the next administration, the top item on our list is to focus on the youth bulge. Almost 70% of Africans are under 25 years old, and Africa's population is projected to grow to 2 billion people by 2050. And that's frightening, because when you have that many people, you have to take care of that many people. You have to feed that many people. You have to shelter that many people. You have to give hope to that many people. You have to provide jobs. You have to ensure that they're invested in the future of your country. And for that reason, we have to ensure that African youth are fully integrated into the development strategies of countries that are moving forward, so that by 2050, they're part of the strategy. Creating opportunity for the youth of Africa requires a wide range of efforts. It requires improving governance and supporting civil society. It requires bringing conflicts to an end. It requires boosting economic growth, improving education systems, improving health care. These are all key elements of what has to be done when you have a bulging youth population. The upcoming panel discussions focuses on two critical challenges for Africa, and their education and health. And in terms of recommended focus areas for the next administration, we believe that education and health will be at the top of the list. In fact, it will be at the top of the list. So today I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about these two areas in terms of the challenges, the opportunities, and the actions that we're taking and the way forward. So let me start with education. The school system it's the breeding ground. The classroom is a breeding ground where young minds are developed. And it's crucial that we focus on these early development stages. Without a strong education, youth in Africa become susceptible to extremism because they lack opportunity, they lack options. And I always like to remind people that educated people are a two-edged sword. They can be major contributors to a country, but they can take that same education, the same skills, the same leadership skills they have, and they can turn it against the country. So when you look at some of the negative operators in a country, many of them are very well educated. They're very smart. They are true leaders, but they use their leadership skills and their education for bad. And what we want to do is ensure that those leadership skills and that education that we know is so important, that these things are used for good. And Africa faced many challenges in the education sector. There's limited funding for education. There's a lack of adequate teachers and classrooms and instructional materials, and primary school enrollment that is among the lowest on the globe. African countries have to provide their youth the opportunity to get a quality education. Young people in Africa are eager for that opportunity, and I saw that every day when I served in Liberia. I saw young students who had not had the opportunity for quality education for more than 20 years as this country fought itself in a civil war. When school systems started to reopen, I saw young people sitting under the streetlights because that was the first time electricity, and electricity is going to be important to contributing to quality education. And these young people didn't have streetlights. They didn't have lights and electricity in their homes. And streetlights were the first opportunity for them to get electricity. And you would drive down the streets at night, and you'd see the little bugs and flies flying around the streetlights if you looked up. But if you looked down, you saw dozens of little kids sitting under the streetlights with their books studying. And that was extraordinary. And when I speak to young kids in the United States, I tell them this story. I wish I had taken pictures, because there was not a time that I would drive down the streets and not see kids studying under streetlights. And that was a huge opportunity for them to have these streetlights where they can do their homework at night. Imagine if they had electricity in their homes, if they had electricity in their schools, if they had libraries that functions and computers, what these kids would accomplish. I saw extraordinary young kids coming out of the poorest education system in the world, and all they needed was a street light. And I used to tell kids a nub. For those of you who don't know what a nub is, it's a pencil that's been sharpened all the way down to the eraser. And these kids, I mean, you have kids, and you know our kids just throw them away. You have drawers and drawers of pencils unsharpened and pens unused. And every once in a while we clean out the drawers and we throw them away. Well, in Liberia, I saw kids with nubs that had no erasers because they'd used the eraser. And I saw them writing around the edges of a page because they were looking for the last bit of white space on a piece of paper so that they can take notes. They want education, they deserve education, and they need the resources to have a quality education, and without that, their countries will fail. So education is a key priority. It's a key priority for us, but it has to be a key priority for African countries. And you see this passion every day when you meet young people across the continent of Africa. I'm rushing when I finish here today to meet with some young Yali, the last of the Yali fellows who were here for the program. And these young people, who have been identified through the President's Young African Leaders Initiative, that brought 1,000 young Africans to the United States for academic and leadership training. These young people are eager to learn. They are eager to lead. And they are the futures of their country. And they are the reason that we all must continue to prioritize finding solutions for the youth bulge on the continent of Africa. But it's also the reason I continue to be optimistic about this continent. They need to have a stake in their country, and they need to know that we are prepared to invest in them. And I have to tell you, I regularly hear from African leaders, why are you picking our young people? You think you can pick our future leaders? You're only touching a little drop in the bucket. And the truth of the matter is, this drop in the bucket is going to taint the entire bucket. Because these young people, every single one of these young people we touch, will touch dozens more. And they will bring along with them dozens of more young people. And yes, we do choose these young people. We choose them in a very transparent way because they have to go online. And I guess that's a bit of a problem because some countries it's not as easy to get online as others, and this is why we have American centers all over Africa that provide the opportunity for people to get online and learn what's happening around the world. But they get online and they have to apply in this program. In the first year of this program, we had 80,000 people go online to apply, and 50,000 of them completed the application process. And their applications were read not because of who their fathers were, where their parents were in the government, how much money they paid to somebody to be considered. They were chosen because of what they wrote on their papers. And it's an extraordinarily transparent process. And so governments say, well, you should bring the list to us and we should approve the list. Well, that sounds good on paper, but I don't want somebody saying, yeah, but we're not going to take this person because this person's father was anti-government. We don't know any of that when we review these applications. We review these applications blindly, and people are selected because of how smart they are, not because of who they are, and they come from all across the country, and we have yet to have a failure among these young people. They have all been extraordinary, and I'll give you an example. I'm totally off script here with my speechwriter sitting in the room, so Phil, I apologize. The first year of the program, we had some young people in the state of Arkansas, and they were at Arkansas State University, and they were staying in a Fiji house. So those of you who've gone to large state universities and know fraternities and sororities, the Fijis are party animals. But the Fijis in Arkansas were more than party animals. They had a bit, some of them, I'm not going to paint them all with the same brush, but a bit of racism among them. And so the students who were staying in Fiji House were harassed. And at one point, someone came out and yelled some obscenities at them and told them they wanted them out of the house. So being the person I am from Louisiana, I freaked out because I thought, oh my God, these young people are going to see this as America. It's going to taint them forever. And I got to reach out to them now to help them get through this. Well, let me tell you, they didn't need me. They did not need me. I organized a conference call with them, and they said, it was one person. We know that this is not a reflection of America, and we're not going to let them win. And we're out the next day, and everybody is going to stay here because we know we have to stand up to this. And they went on. That's leadership. It was true leadership, and I knew then we have not made any mistakes in these young people. Nobody was scared. I would have been scared. I went to LSU. I know what's possible. These people were not afraid. They were not afraid. They knew what they were there for, and they wanted to focus on what they were there for. They weren't prepared to point fingers of blame at us. They wanted to continue with their program. That's leadership, and we need to make sure we do everything possible to promote and support and encourage and give tools to those types of leaders so that the next generation ruling Africa will be a generation that rules in a successful way. We're also focusing a lot of efforts to move away from YALI on improving reading skills for children in primary schools, working on policies and reforms to make classrooms safer, and to improve educational environments. And we're making a huge push toward promoting girls' education. Only 51% of women in Africa above the age of 15 are able to read and write. There needs to be a greater focus on girls' education and on making sure that girls enroll in school and are able to stay in school. When Secretary Kerry was on his most recent trip to Nigeria, he met with a group of young STEM girls. And the youngest among them were 13 and 14-year-olds, and they were inventors. They were creative. They showed us some of their inventions. One 14-year-old girl showed us, I called it a forklift, but it wasn't. It was a lift mechanism to help women who have to carry heavy loads. I mean, you see the back-breaking work that women do in Africa. So no man, excuse me, fellow men, thinks about how to make it easier for a woman to lessen her loads. No boy in school. You're going to be thinking about how to improve locomotives and planes and all that. And here's this young girl who thinks, how can I make it more efficient for my mother to do her work? And so we have to give them opportunities to do that kind of thinking, to do that kind of, those kinds of inventions and to do that kind of work. And they stood up in front of Secretary Kerry. He's quite an imposing guy. He's over 6 feet tall, white hair. He's imposing for me. And these little girls stood up in front of him and described their projects. And one of them said, and because I was in this program, I have the confidence to stand in front of you and speak. I was impressed. And they are going, and we have to make sure there are more little girls like that. And none of them were over the age of 19. One had gone to MIT and had graduated and gone back. Others were applying to Stanford University. They were 16-year-olds, and some of them on the verge of graduating and applying to universities in the United States. And I have to tell you, if there's nothing, I'm proud of a lot of things that we've done in this administration. But that program, with just about 12 girls sitting in the room, I have never been prouder. I had to fight back the tears because I know that if we do just a little bit more of this everywhere in the world, we are going to create amazing scientists. We're going to create amazing politicians. We're going to create the next generation of Nobel Peace Prize winners and Nobel Economic Prize winners all over the world. They just need a little bit of help. So education will be a key recommendation that we will be making to the next year's administration. And through the President's emergency plan in terms of health, the emergency plans for AIDS relief, DREAMS partnership, we're investing in keeping girls in schools in 10 sub-Saharan African countries. And this is part of a package of interventions designed to reduce HIV/AIDS infections in adolescent girls and young women by 40%. But this also helps address issues that are related to early marriage and girls having children too young. Because many of these girls, if they were not in these education programs, would be married and would be uneducated and would not be able to help their children, the next generation, become more educated. So this is key in our minds to success, and we'll be working on these issues with a lot of fervor in terms of putting together our recommendations for the next generation. We also have to focus on universities. I remind people all the time, and for those of you from Africa in the room, you know how great your universities were. If you had a degree from Amada Bello, or you had a degree from McCary, if you had a degree from the University of Liberia, which I knew quite well, you had a quality degree. These schools are not producing quality degrees anymore. They are still producing quality students because students who are committed, doesn't matter how bad a university is or how bad a professor is, a committed student will find a way. So there's still fantastic students being produced from these universities. But as we visit these universities, Legon and others that I visited in the 70s when I was younger, those universities are not getting the investments from their countries that they need. You have to put money in if you want your universities to continue to prosper, and we need to encourage the universities to do that. And we're encouraging American universities also to partner with African universities so that we can help on building the next generation. On the health side, we also have a lot of work to do. I think health and education are intertwined in a way. We saw the link clearly during the Ebola outbreak. Lack of education about disease transmission led to poor health decisions. Strengthening Africa's healthcare infrastructure and human resources for health is a critical priority that we will be making recommendations on. Africa has made some major gains in health. The rate of new HIV/AIDS infections has dropped significantly, and malaria deaths are way down. But many challenges still remain. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of maternal and child deaths of any region. Only 32% of the population in Sub-Saharan Africa has basic access to power, which is, again, a key part of quality health. And this deficit prevents progress in the health and education sectors. Polio has reemerged in northern Nigeria, representing a setback to the global polio eradication efforts. And we're closely tracking Zika virus in Africa. Cases are being reported in Guinea-Bissau, Cabo Verde, including new cases that have been imported from the southern hemisphere of the United States, of Brazil. There are over 6,000 suspected cases of yellow fever in Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So these are all major challenges. We know that African countries can overcome this. We saw what Nigeria was able to do with the Ebola crisis. In fact, I saw a film a few weeks ago called, was it 93 Hours? No, 93 Days. Amanda, what was that film we saw? 93 Days. It was on how Nigeria dealt with the Ebola crisis. And I highly recommend, once this film is out, that you see it. Danny Glover plays, is in the film, and I hope that it eventually gets out. We're hoping to show it in the State Department soon. It was incredible, seeing the incredible work that the Nigerian doctors were able to do to ensure that Ebola did not take hold in Nigeria, because had it taken hold in Nigeria, we'd still be dealing with it. Let me give you the example of Botswana in 2001 with HIV/AIDS rising. The president there, President Mohai, pledged to make HIV a national priority. The government of Botswana began partnering with the United States through PEPFAR to distribute life-saving antiretroviral treatments at no cost to citizens living with HIV. And as a result, the HIV prevalence rate among adults in Botswana fell from nearly 40% to the current rate of 25%. But we got to get it down to less than that. For our part, the U.S. government has a number of initiatives to help with that, to help build healthcare systems. In 2014, the White House launched the Global Health Security Agenda, and through this initiative, the United States is committed to working with at least 16 countries on the continent of Africa to prevent, detect, and respond to future outbreaks before they become epidemics. PEPFAR has saved millions of lives and has brought the AIDS-free generation within reach. The President's Malaria Initiative has had great success reducing malaria mortality rates in 19 African countries, and the United States led the international response to the Ebola crisis, and U.S. government staff remain present in Guinea and Liberia, Sierra Leone, working with governments to build local capacity. We are also working very, very closely with the AU to develop, to establish the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and we hope that the Africa CDC will serve as a platform for sustainable public health capacity. So as we continue to go forward, we hope that the initiatives that I've outlined above will be part of those things that the next administration will look at, as previous administrations have continued with initiatives done by administrations before them. So, 4 months. It's been a really amazing ride being a part of this administration, and as we look forward, we recognize that we must continue the work that we've started. We recognize the major challenges that Africa faces in health and education, but as I've noted, we're seeing a lot of progress, and we know that with hard work, with commitment, we can overcome the challenges that we've faced on the continent. They are, we need committed partners. We need committed partners on the African continent in this effort. Our Yali Fellows are part of those committed partners, but also many African countries. There are a couple of African presidents who are currently in town. I think the president of Mozambique was here, and the president of Namibia is in town as well. We saw him yesterday, and they really represent the kinds of commitment and the kinds of partnership that we hope to continue with Africa, whether it's this administration over the next 4 months or the next administration over the next 4 years. Because ultimately, if we are to achieve the goals I started with, the goals of democracy, prosperity, and peace on the continent of Africa, it's going to require a strong commitment by governments. We can't want it more than governments want it. And that commitment is going to start with education, and it's going to require strong healthcare systems. So I'm thrilled again that you are focusing on this crucial topic today. I again say to you that we need your expertise, we need your ideas, we need your advocacy. Your advocacy is so important if Africa is to remain a priority for the next administration. And as I always note, this is a team effort. It's not one person that can do it alone. We have to strengthen ourselves by working as a team. It's a team sport. And it's not for the weak. It's not for the uncommitted. It's not for the people who will give up. It's for the strong. And only the strong will survive together if we are to see the continent of Africa become the continent of the future that will continue to contribute to our global work. So let me end again where I started, by thanking you for all of your support, all of your work, And I look forward, in whatever capacity I'm in the next administration, to continuing to work with you to support the efforts that you are making, but also I will be looking to you to support whatever efforts I am involved in, so that together we can make Africa continue to change in a positive direction. So let me thank you, Congresswoman Bass, and thank all of you for everything that you are doing, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate with you.
And I am sure that Madam President is going to have her continue in the next administration. I've declared it. Let's give her another round of applause, Assistant Secretary. And as the Assistant Secretary was mentioning the Yali Fellows, the Young African Leaders Initiative of President Obama, one of the things that I have found fascinating in every country that I visit, I always meet with Yali Fellows, is in addition to the fact that they gain tremendous leadership skills by participating in the program, one of the main things that they gain is a relationship with each other. And so it's very exciting to hear young African leaders talk about how, you know, I'm from Kenya, but I met someone from Botswana, and because of technology, they are still connected. And I think that is going to be tremendous, not just for their own countries, but for the overall continent. So I'm very excited about that program, and I think that there's a number of programs and initiatives of President Obama that really kind of flew under the radar screen, but that we could certainly celebrate. And I believe that one of the Yali Fellows is with us, Ade Piju. Oh, please stand, please stand. We need to give her a round of applause. The Yali Fellows are now called Mandela Scholars, but we appreciate her. I want to mention a few folks before I bring up our leader for our next panel. The Assistant Secretary made reference several times to Mel Foote. Mel Foote is the founder and leader of the Constituency for Africa. Please stand, Mel. I'm sure half the room knows Mel very well. He's been at it for a long time and just finished having the Ron Brown series. And I look forward to hearing those recommendations as well. So while we are having our meeting talking about what is the policy going to be in the next administration, there were other activists throughout the town all this week. So we're all going to put it together, and we're going to make sure that the next president knows what we feel the agenda for Africa should be. I want to mention a couple of other people in the room. David, I'm going to call on you in a second. David Akuth, please stand. David Akuth is a former intern in my office, but he is from South Sudan, and if people remember the Lost Boys and Girls grew up. They are now young men and women, as David is. And David, during the time that he interned in my office, brought a policy proposal forward. And he proposed that the U.S. government support the now young men and women of South Sudan who want to go home, actually, want to go home and want to contribute to what's going on in their country. And so we have proposed a project in USAID that would support the lost boys and girls returning home and making contributions to their country. And so we introduced that piece of legislation yesterday, and that he is the author and gave that proposal to me. We had a delegation of former lost boys and lost girls who all are from this general region, but they've had tremendous accomplishments. I mean, they've been here, they've studied, they've gotten their degrees, they're in various professions, making contributions to our country, and now it's time that they go home. And we don't necessarily want them to go home right now because things are not very peaceful there now, but given that it takes a while for legislation to go through, we figure by the time this bill is signed that things would be more stable in South Sudan and they could return home. So I wanted to acknowledge him. And then you should know that in Los Angeles, we actually have royalty in our city. There is a congresswoman who we consider our own personal royalty, and she is here. She has always stood by my side. She's also always pointed her finger and told me what I was doing. And I'm standing up here today because she decided that she was going to retire and I was taking her place. And so when the Congresswoman tells you what to do, you listen and do that. So I would like to ask Congresswoman Diane Watson, would you please stand so we can acknowledge your presence. So let's move into our next panel, and I want to introduce the leader of our panel, our moderator, a man that I had the honor of meeting in Addis Ababa. He is Ambassador Reuben Brigady. He was appointed Dean of the Elliott School of International Affairs last October. And prior to this appointment, Dean Brigady served as the Ambassador of the United States to the African Union. I think that's an incredible job. That means he was really the ambassador for the entire continent of Africa. He served in that role from 2013 until 2015. He is a 1995 Distinguished Graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He holds a master's in philosophy and a PhD in international relations from the University of Cambridge. He's a member of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and a recipient of the Council's International Affairs Fellowship. That is a tremendous background. Ambassador Brigady, you will introduce the other panelists. Thank you so much.
Representative Bass, thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and more importantly, far more importantly, thank you for the extraordinary leadership that you have provided and continue to provide on matters related to Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a great honor for all of us to follow the fantastic presentation of one of America's most distinguished diplomats, Assistant Secretary Linda Thomas Greenfield, with the next panel discussion on building the African health and education infrastructure. It has been said many times, and it's been said many times because it is true, that Africa's greatest resource is its people. However, we also know that for people to thrive, we must ensure that they have not only the basics, but indeed what is most important with regard to their human development, with regard to health and education. This is something that we know about in theory, but we're going to spend the next several minutes talking about very practical steps that can be taken over the next several years, particularly as we move into the next U.S. presidential administration in this regard. And we have an extraordinary panel of experts to help us talk about that. Starting from my far right is Mr. Robert Mallett, who is the director of AfriCare. To my immediate right is Ms. Vivian Derrick of the Bridges Institute. To my far left is Dr. Daniel Karanja of the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa. And to my immediate left, he's always been introduced to you, Mademoiselle Adepeju Jayoba of Mother's Delivery Kit Ventures. So what we will do is I will allow each of our panelists to speak for about 5 minutes, and you will find me to be a gracious and gentle yet firm timekeeper to ensure that we are able to have as many views represented as possible. So each of our speakers will speak for about 5 minutes on the topic. I may ask a question or two of each of them to further spur conversation, and then we will try to leave the majority of our time for interaction with the audience to make sure we take advantage of the extraordinary expertise that is here in the room. So, without further delay, let us start with Mr. Robert Mallett of AfriCare.
Good afternoon, good morning, still just a few minutes to all of you, and thank you for welcoming AfriCare to this panel. I am the president and CEO of AfriCare, and I've been on the job for about 9 months. I just had my 9-month anniversary about 6 days ago. AfriCare, an organization with which many of you may be familiar, has a great deal of experience in development in Africa, as represented by our 46-year commitment. We have worked in every region of the continent since 1970, so we are familiar with the people we work with every day. We describe our work as starting where the tarmac ends, as we do last mile development, which is our expertise. And we are deeply embedded in communities where we work with a primary focus on agriculture and food security, nutrition, health, mainly in maternal and child health, HIV and malaria and some TB, humanitarian assistance, and lately, youth empowerment. You heard Ambassador Thomas Greenfield refer to the large number of young people on the African continent, and that we see as a clear and present opportunity, not a danger, an opportunity for us as a development organization. We approach our work through 4 primary strategies. And for health, this means we build capacity, improve outcomes, and enhance health system resilience, increasing the coverage of essential health care interventions within the primary care system. And we try to do that by deep community engagement, ownership, and knowledge capture and validation of what happens in communities. We like to use and train and task shift because in an environment mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, we have been in every region, but most of our work now is done in sub-Saharan Africa. Work that would be done in, say, the United States or Europe by nurse practitioners, some by physicians, has to be done because of the absence of so many of those professionals on the continent in some communities and in some parts of Africa. We have to train people who do not have formal training to do some of this work. And they are on the lowest totem pole within most healthcare structures, but they're community health workers. And they represent a mighty fine investment for those of us in development working in these regions in health. They deliver, say in Liberia, an essential package of primary health care services in pre and neonatal care, nutritional screening and counseling, and education. I was in Tanzania in June of this year, and we're in 2,000 villages around the country of Tanzania, where I saw how community health workers and others are helping to train members of that community around nutrition issues. Health assessments, people who take blood pressures, people who monitor kids for fever, contact tracing and tracking, an absolutely essential skill for community health workers. And that was the winning formula in Nigeria for Ebola not to take effect there. Most of you may not know this, but Uganda is the country where there have been more Ebola episodes than any country in the world. But you've never really heard about those episodes in Uganda because community health workers were very, very, very useful in tracing people and the contacts they had made to ensure that it did not turn into an epidemic in Uganda. And then community health workers also do a lot of community case management, particularly of child diseases, as well as training and working with grandmothers and more mature mothers in villages to monitor young women who are pregnant. So you use what communities have in order to extend the leverage of the health system. So that level of community engagement, ownership, and capturing their knowledge and validating it, and where we need to help improve it, we do that. That's done by Africa and many other development organizations, but that is a hallmark of the kind of work we do. The second thing I'd emphasize that's important to address some of the needs in Africa, and we have now at Africa a very strong emphasis on centers of excellence, or hubs of excellence. That model promotes innovation. It promotes innovation by ensuring that we have high standards of care. And when you have high standards of care, you create unbelievable demand. And when you create high demand, you force governments and others to pay attention to what your needs are. In Uganda, for example, we have established something called the Infectious Diseases Institute. Do I have no minutes left, or is my time up?
You have about a minute. You've had about a minute.
All right. Okay. Well, also, there is no substitute for research and evaluation. None whatsoever. African governments must invest in research and evaluation. 12.3% of the population, less than 1% of scholarly publications. That can change, and we know that can change because it's changing in the health sciences, but not in STEM. 43% of all African research now is done in the health sciences. Wonderful for the work we do in health, but not building enough capacity in other areas to improve how we do health. So that's a very important component of our work. And finally, introduction of new technologies. There is no reason why some new technologies, as we saw with the cell phone in sub-Saharan Africa, a generation-skipping technology, cannot be put to work. But there are other instruments of technology. We believe that you can begin to use Bitcoin technology, or the smart card readers, or DECI readers that we use in Nigeria to help figure out viral load. Our view at Africare, and I wind up here, is to do the following, and it's an ancient Chinese proverb by La Cha. It says, go to the people, live with them, learn from them, start with what they know, build on what they have. But with the best organizations, when the work is done, the task is accomplished, the people will say, we have done it ourselves. We believe in that at Africare.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Derrick, you have the floor.
Thank you. And thank you for, to Congresswoman Bass, thank you for including education in the panel. And Linda Thomas Greenfield just set it up for me, so I'm going to skip through a lot of what I was going to say because I know that you all are convinced about the importance of education. Tragically, donors have been reducing their investment in education, and also African governments have also not increased, and in some cases decreased their investment in education. So we have a lot of work to do. So when I think about education, I think about four things: access, quality, retention, and completion. So that's what I'm going to talk about. First, in terms of where we are now, and then secondly, a proposal for a massive investment by the next administration. So in terms of access, enrollments are rising because of the Millennium Development Goals and the now Sustainable Development Goals. Girls' enrollment is up, and now, according to some statistics, girls have 92% of access to boys in Africa, so that's incredible. But then sometimes we get less rosy statistics. And quality is a major problem. Many students reach the end of primary school and they still can't read. There are inappropriate curriculums, and it usually takes students about 7 years to complete primary school. Retention is a problem because 2 out of 5 kids drop out of primary school. Girls drop out because of lack of latrines. I know we're supposed to be talking about infrastructure, which I'm not going to focus on that physical infrastructure, except to say that that is a major problem, and it's something that's so simple that can be fixed. In terms of completion, 70% of primary school leavers do not go on to secondary school, 70%. There are 2 other factors that are important. One is the conflicts and how do you educate kids in the middle of conflicts. Think South Sudan, Mali, Northern Nigeria, CAR. And the rapid technological change in social media. So all of this is shifting and changing the environment. So given these challenges, you've got to have some priorities. My priority would be to focus on early childhood to secondary, given the youth bulge. You know, there are 200 million people between the ages of 15 and 24 in Africa. Africa has the youngest population in the world. So here are my 2 big recommendations: to focus first on improving quality, and then secondly on building employment for that 70%, building employment options. So I'm going to start with the quality issue. Are you with me? Now, there's access, quality, retention, completion. So this one is on quality. So again, there are two options here now. You can start with what you've got in country, or you can just say this is just too difficult and outsource it. To improve what you have, you can begin at the community level, because that's where change begins, and engage traditional leaders, engage parents through PTAs, and make teachers a respected part of the community. Because if traditional leaders help with this, then you see a totally different perspective on teachers. There needs to be new curriculum developed with a focus on civic education. We need to build new national cultures. We need to reinforce the concept of democracy and good governance in schools. You need to build a sense of national cohesion in that curriculum. And you need to teach children to think about nation before ethnicity. And there might be a national curriculum writing project. This is if you want to engage in your own school, in your own country. But some countries think that this is too difficult, and they're really experimenting with outsourcing education. The Bridges International Academy is active in Kenya and Uganda. Liberia is planning to outsource its entire primary education system over the next 5 years to the Bridges International Institute. Now you can imagine that this is really quite controversial. Bridges is the world's largest innovation company. It has 100,000 students in 400 plus networks. Its big claim to fame.
Just go ahead and finish, and we can. Yeah, you can wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Anyway, so
There we go.
So that's one. All right. Then completion. What do you do with this 70%? And that's really the essence of this, because 40% of the youth that are joining Al Qaeda cite the fact that they're unemployed. Unemployed youth are the bulk of Boko Haram. And so it's important to really have any new program that focuses on these kids. So I'm hoping that the new administration will mount a whole of government initiative on African education from early childhood through secondary. And they should mount this campaign by beginning to get buy-in from African governments. Then investigate social impact investing, because it's a way of getting more involvement with little money. And empower USAID to encourage powerships to rebuild its education portfolio, and use diaspora organizations as much as possible. Also use YALI. Here we have, as Linda described, this remarkable group. So that's my conclusion. Education is better than rubies. Thank you.
Ms. Derrick, thank you very much. Mademoiselle Adepejo.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to start off with a little story of how I came to found my organization. In 2011, I lost a close friend at childbirth. We were classmates in the university. She had the whole world, around her. She had big dreams. She had big aspirations, big goals, and wanted to do great things in life. And then she got married, got pregnant, and died at childbirth. And that was my own turning point, because it made me realize that when I see 1 in 13, women, all those statistics, 3 million people dying at childbirth, 1 in 13 women at risk at childbirth, and things like that. With my friend, I realized that it's not just numbers. There are real people behind these numbers. And that's how come I founded Mothers Delivery Kits, because it made me realize that if my friend, who is educated, who had the finances to get or seek good health care in Nigeria, in a city in Nigeria, what was happening in the rural communities? And that's when I went into the rural communities, and I saw women giving birth on bare floors. I saw midwives using their mouth to suck out mucus from nostrils of a newborn because they could not access equipment like the mucus extractor, which costs like 50 cents in Nigeria. I saw birth attendants using rusty blade or broken glass to severe umbilical cord, exposing babies to neonatal tetanus. And that really made me scared. It made me scared not only for the women, but it made me scared for myself, because I am a woman too. And I really want to have children too in future. And I know that 1 in 13 could be me. It was my friend in 2011. It could be me anytime. And that's when I started Mother's Delivery Kits. What we do is we produce delivery kits in Lagos, Nigeria. We connect women in rural communities to the life-saving supplies they need at childbirth. This kit contains basic life savings equipment, things that you would normally and usually take for granted here. So you have things like the gloves, things like the delivery mats, so that women don't lay on bare floors, or so that plastic sheets used by birth attendants don't, continue to be reused for women at childbirth after they disinfect it with warm water and salt. You have things like chlorhexidil gel for cord care. You have things like the scalpel blades, things like the gloves, bundle of cotton wool. You have things like misoprostol, to curb postpartum hemorrhage. Because working in rural communities in Nigeria, I found out that one of their best efforts to curb postpartum hemorrhage was actually to tell a woman after childbirth who was bleeding to sit on a high chair, close her legs, and hope that the bleeding would stop. And if it doesn't stop, they quickly organize to move her to a bigger facility. Now, what happens basically is this. As they move her to these facilities miles away from where she stays or where she's giving birth, she gets rejected at that facility. Why? They say that, she didn't register with them and they don't want to up their own data or statistics in respect of women who die. So they keep on moving her from center to center to center until she dies in front of, another facility. And then that way, her death is not recorded anywhere because she died right in front of the facility, not inside. So those things make me, realize that I need to do something about it. I need to take a stand. I need to make a change. And that's when I found Yali. I wanted to start my company. I had no business knowledge. I had no funding. I had no background in global health. I only had experience from the death of my friend. I had passion because I didn't want it to happen to me or anybody else I knew. I had that vision, I had that drive, I had the goal, but I didn't have the support I need. I found Yali, applied, got business education at the University of Texas at Austin, got global health experience at the Union Foundation, working with their mama team there, and then I got funding from USADF. Today, I employ 17 full-time staff. I have 79 women working for me in different rural communities across Nigeria as my agents. I have sold almost 100,000 kits. So when you ask me today about, how do we build African infrastructure in health and education, my answer is simple. Invest in the people, and you will see the change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Adepejo. Congresswoman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a brief change in our program to introduce a very distinguished member of Congress, relatively new member of Congress. Hakeem Jeffries is from New York, and he serves on the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus Leadership Team, as the whip. Prior to that, he was in the state legislature in New York. And he is one of our most gifted and dynamic speakers and young leaders. And I want you to Google him and go to the YouTube and listen to some of his unbelievable speeches that he has made on the floor and in Congress. Hakeem Jeffries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We will now continue with our panel with Dr. Karanja. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, being the last speaker, and everybody has taken my points. I'm just going to add to this and kind of personalize it a little bit. I grew up in Kenya, in rural Kenya, on a small farm, and my mother struggled a lot. Watching many women toiling all day in the field, tilling their land with a hand hoe, with their babies on their back, is what actually inspired me to study hard and work hard and study agriculture in the hope that I could be a source of solution. When I went to college and studied agriculture, I realized that was good education, a lot of theory. You learned how people do different things in other countries, but I still could not get the application that I could use locally. So I aspired to join the Kenya Agricultural Research Institute, where I worked for more than 10 years. And my passion there was actually to develop technologies that helped smallholder farmers. I tested a lot of technologies from India and Pakistan, and many of those made good economic sense. But when I worked with the communities in terms of social acceptability and application locally, most of them were not acceptable. They did not fit in the context of African smallholder farmers. So I realized that we needed more investments to actually have homegrown solutions or make adjustments to imported technology. Throughout my career at the Kenya Agricultural Research Institute, I realized there are 4 things that are critical to really making progress in Africa. One of them is actually investing in people, basically taking from where Adepejo stopped. We have to invest in the human resource. Unless we do that, we cannot develop. Number 2, we need strong policies. So the role of government is key in that, making sure that they come up with policies that are supportive of the economic environment they're looking at. The third one is building strong institutions. You can have good policies, you can have good people, but if you don't have strong institutions that carry the mandate forward, that's difficult to do. And lastly, you definitely need good technologies. The organization I worked for, Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa, was started about 15 years ago by several African presidents and with partners here in the United States. We focus on 4 things. 1, building human capacity in science and technology, improving agricultural markets and trade, investing in infrastructure, and right now we are looking at new models of accelerating infrastructure investments in Africa through public-private partnerships. And around the world, especially in the South, in the Deep South, there are many good models that bring in private capital to investments. And lastly, improving U.S. programs and policies so that they are supportive of African priorities. This did not happen before. When CAADP came along, many people did not take it seriously, but the partnership was there to anchor CAADP conversations here and to urge the U.S. government to support that. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the latest McKinsey Global Institute report on Africa. Basically, they are saying Africa developed very well in the last 1.5 decades, but current numbers are showing that that's slackening, and mainly because we know that commodity prices have gone down, some countries have been thrown into turmoil. But here are the 6 priorities going forward. They project a strong long-term growth for Africa because they see that the macroeconomic conditions are still right in Africa. They are being strengthened. The human resource, again, we talked about the youth and the institutions are strong, are becoming stronger and networked. And they say there is a huge untapped market and business opportunity, and that's where there is a huge lag. They say there are 6 priority areas of investments in Africa that are key to continuing growth. 1 is mobilizing domestic resources. We have to see governments investing more in people, more of their resources, not just depending on donors and private foundations.
Doctor, I'm sorry, if you forgive me, may I ask you to complete that list of
Very
6 and then
quickly.
we'll do, yeah?
Exactly. The next one is aggressively diversifying economies. There are a lot of economies that largely depend on 1 or 2 commodities. 3 is accelerating infrastructure development because that's key to lowering business costs and transaction costs. 3 is deepening regional integration because some of those economies are too small. And fourth is creating tomorrow's talents, basically investing in education. And Vivian talked about primary and early childhood education. I would insist that we need to invest more in higher education and capacity building, especially for business development. That's an area that governments have not invested in. And lastly is ensuring healthy urbanization. There's a lot of urbanization, the highest rates in the world, and we are seeing a lot of consumption growth that's actually driving demand for commodities. So connecting farmers, connecting agriculture and urbanization, and getting the young people to actually play a role in adding value to the products, getting them to the markets, and creating jobs locally. That's where I see a lot of potential growth going forward. I'll be glad to maybe discuss more during Q&A.
Thank you very much. So, colleagues, I've been tasked with helping us make up time on the schedule. With regard to the original published schedule, this panel is due to end at 1:05. So, rather than engaging in questions on the panel initially, as I had originally stated, what I'd like to do is go straight to Q&A in the audience. As I suspect there are many of you who have an awful lot to say and to ask. There are microphones both in the center and the far aisle. I'd ask you to step up to the microphone. Would you have a question? Please state your name and state your question. Let me also ask that out of respect for everybody else in the room that you have a question rather than a statement. If you have difficulty transforming a statement into a question, I will be happy to assist you in that regard. Thank you very much. We will start with the gentleman here in the middle.
Thank you, Doug, and thanks to the panelists. My name is Ahmed Karabo from Sierra Leone, and I want to thank my congressman to be here from New York. I just have a few things that I want to mention, which you all...
I assume that means a question that you want to ask.
Well,
please,
just a comment.
Please, a question, please. And very quickly, thank you very much.
A question. Talking about incentives and also about healthcare personally, how would you guys help developing countries or poor countries in Africa bring in those students who want to actually pursue medical professions to actually go to schools and become the professionals of health for Africa?
That's a fantastic question.
And
Thank you very much.
If I may just finish, Doug.
Please.
If I may finish.
Please, quickly.
While we're here today, because of the Ebola, the cameras are out, and then there are many statistics saying that the epidemic is finished, but I guarantee you, it's still ravaging those countries. So please join me and other people so that Congress can push and also reauthorize the TPS for our people.
Great, thank you so much. Perhaps I could ask Mr. Mallett and Ms. Derrick to approach those two, both from the question of healthcare, so the human side of healthcare capacity, and also the education side. Please, Mr. Mallett.
I think with respect to professional medical education, certainly more of it needs to happen in country. Lots of it is happening outside of the country, and some people are going back. And the traditional, the familiarity we have is many Africans come here or Europe, they get trained and they stay here. That trend is actually reversing itself. People are actually going home. But we'll never be able to solve some of these problems by people simply getting medical degrees. I'm not denigrating it, this is extremely important. To really strengthen health systems where in low resource settings, that is to say where the infrastructure is reasonably weak, as we would see it, is to begin to do more indigenous training, help people task shift, things that professionals used to do, they don't have to do anymore. We got loads of people who are available to be trained, they're embedded in those communities, they have a great deal of trust, and we can use them that way.
Thank you very much. Ms. Derrick.
So I would say that first you have to begin with making sure that students have basic literacy and numeracy, that they have facility in that. And that goes back to the importance of primary education. Second, to reinforce STEM, because that's where you're going to get the best preparation for a medical school education. There are so many efforts now that are supported by the USG and others to make sure that STEM is important and that STEM actually works in schools. Then thirdly, if the student, when he or she makes it to secondary school, is affiliated with another program, such as affiliation with a YALI fellow or a YALI program, so that he or she is reinforced. In Sierra Leone in particular, there's a major effort to make sure that girls in STEM who want to be in medical school do have support. And then lastly, there's the hoped for CDC for Africa. So if possible, schools should keep up with how that's moving forward so that there's some reinforcement at the government level.
Thank you very much. To ensure we get in the maximum number of questions in the time we have allotted, what I'll do is I'll take 3 to 4 questions in a row, and then I can parcel them out to the panelists. We'll start with the gentleman here in the far end.
My name is Ivan Milosi. I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo. While building education infrastructure, I wanted to ask, because I'm seeing that the focus is on educating the current generation, but what about those who are already educated? Because what will motivate a young boy or a girl whose both parents have college degrees, but they have never get an opportunity to have a job? Because we might have infrastructure, but if there is no job opportunity, I think there might be lack of motivation. Why should I go to school if my parents went to school, they have college degree, and they don't have a job?
Thank you very much. Sir, in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Ambassador Tunde Adetunji. I congratulate you for this panel. Now, I want to ask a question on the YALI. The sustainability of this project is very, very crucial to this administration and the next one. But it is one-sided. Why don't we have the Young Americans Leaders Initiative to bridge the gap and build the bridge with the Young African Leaders Initiative? Most of them want to work in Africa. The cultural values is missing. They don't know the culture of Africa, and they are eager, but this is missing. When they launched the Young African Leaders Initiative, the African Americans are also looking forward to how they can integrate into the continent of Africa. That's why we have the Chinese taking advantage of Africa Initiative. Secondly, why don't we launch the Africa Open for Business to take care of the Young African Leaders Initiative who are going into turning their passion to purpose? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Sir, gentleman forward.
Thank you, Doctor. My name is Kevin Lineberg. I'm from Southeast Washington. I taught at Bassa High School in 1973 in Liberia. My question, when I came back in the 90s, I entered a career in law enforcement here in Washington, D.C. with the Federal Law Enforcement Agency. And what I didn't hear, and I work with the youth for offenders, what I didn't hear is a initiative, a major health initiative is mental health. And the subset of mental health I'm talking about is chemical dependency. If you're talking about HIV eradication, if you don't talk about substance abuse, prevention, treatment, and outreach, then you're not dealing with substance abuse. And I'm just wondering, is there an initiative? Has there been any thought? Or will this be part of the new agenda for the new administration, that with urbanization globally and with the youth population in Africa, in the Kinshasa, in Pretoria, Johannesburg, a lot of first world problems are coming to Africa in urban areas. The same kinds of issues I looked at for 25 years. And I'm going to end with this. When I was in Liberia in 1973, a young man said, "Mr. Kevin, Our minds are not underdeveloped. He said we might be living in an undeveloped country, but our minds are not underdeveloped. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And perhaps one more for this group from the gentleman in the middle.
Okay. My name is Divine Anye. I'm from the National Intelligence University. I got a number of concerns about the potential of youth, and there's a critical driver, which is the cyber, that drives crime, drives a lot of terrorist activity, recruitment, transfer of money, and all that good stuff. YALI is an interesting program, but there is a missing point that we think can help resolve some of those problems, and say connecting YALI with professionals in the United States or here can help in expanding education and developing a good relationship on how some of those critical problems, like cybersecurity concerns, can be addressed to some extent. I was struggling just to be part of a YALI program, the last one, and I wasn't able to, but they were connecting with cultural organizations. I think when they come here, they need to talk to some professionals to tell them what they equally need to do professionally back home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, really interesting group of first set of questions. Let me start with the issue of connecting education with jobs, because the questioner suggested that if there are no jobs, why should they be motivated to become educated? But then there's the other side of that, as we've seen in Egypt, as we see in Syria, as we see in Tunisia, where you have highly educated young people who have no economic opportunity, and that leads to all kinds of social instability. So since Dr. Karanja, you mentioned this, and also Depejo, you experienced this as a young person in Nigeria, I wonder if I can ask each of you to help. What are your specific recommendations of how to link the question of higher education to actual job creation?
Yeah, I think specifically the way to address this, if you look at the curriculum in most African institutions, it's very theoretical. It's not connected to the needs of the community. And I think most universities have kind of remained aloof and out of touch with their communities. So the application part is missing. What I would suggest is learning from institutions like in the US, the land-grant universities, that basically serve the communities and connect the theory, the learning, with the practice, the business community, and also extension, training others. We see that model working very well. In Africa, it might be tweaked because institutions don't work well together. But this idea of also allowing people to intern at private sector firms, I think that allows people to get experience, internships, scholarships, apprenticeships. These are things that are not there in Africa. And we see that if universities do that, if they reach out to the communities, if they reach out to the private sector, then the connection, the bridge is there already for students to move from school to work. Let me just respond to the YALI suggestion. Sure. I think it's a great program, but it can tend to be isolationist back in the continent. I mean, so you put all these young people on a pedestal and they go back to their countries and they cannot connect with their communities. So I think the idea of strengthening their connections back, providing them with support and funding that they need to actually apply the ideas they learn here in their communities, and then connecting back to the professionals in the diaspora and back in their countries. I think that will basically expand the impacts of this program.
Yeah. Mr. Depejo, can I ask you to address both the question of jobs and education, but also this question of, as a YALI alumna, of connection. Are you on a pedestal? And how do you, I ask that only obviously sort of jokingly, but you've actually done a fantastic job of connecting what you've learned to the communities. I'm wondering what other lessons you can apply to that.
Okay, so the thing about YALI is this. The people selected for YALI are actually from the community. So it's not like you are bringing people from outside the community. They actually engage in community work within their community. So connecting back is also a function of understanding that everything you learn, everything I learned while in the US, may not be applicable directly to my own community setting. So I need to be able to convert it to something that can be applicable to my community. So I get exposed to all these technologies, I get exposed to all these lofty goals, all these, different things that are working effectively here. But I also understand that, my country is not America. I don't have 24 hours light supply. At most, I have like an hour a day, and when you have it consistently for like 5 hours in one day, you become scared and you start thinking, how will I pay back this? Because NEPA is going to take it back from you one way or the other. You may not have light for maybe like a stretch of 1 week because you have it for 5 hours in a day. So I understand that my country is not America, and that understanding would help to implement or help you to know what to implement, out of everything you have learned in your own community. I also know that somebody asked the question about suggesting that Americans should also go to Nigeria. I know that this question also came up during President Obama's town hall meeting with young African leaders, and he announced the launch of the Young American Leaders Initiative that will take Americans to Africa to learn the culture, in Africa. So I know that he announced that and said he was going to kick off maybe next year or something. So that's also on the side. So no, I'm not on a pedestal. Yes, I am from the community. Yes, I understand that everything I learn here, I need to be able to convert it to an adaptable format within my own community. And I agree with the part that, you need to be able to connect to people, back here and maybe some professionals back here. But I also think that it is the function of the institutions that you attend. There are institutions across the United States. I was in Austin, so I connect with business leaders and people in Austin that we're exposed to during our stay, in the United States. So no, I'm not on a pedestal. There's always also the U.S. Embassy back home and the American Corners that helps to, help you integrate back into the community and help you to streamline everything you have learned and implement it within your community.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mallett, can I ask you to try to address this question on mental health and chemical dependency? I mean, I think the questioner's comment is really important. As this massive youth population becomes more urbanized, we certainly will see more of these ills, and mental health, frankly, is something that is, even in the United States amongst the African American community, is not something that's talked about a great deal. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly have some thoughts on the mental health issue. I don't have many on what the trend lines are with respect to illicit drugs, because I have no data about that. So I wouldn't want to hazard any comment about that. But I will say one of the things that we have talked about at AfriCare is whether or not we can begin to look at this issue of mental health, particularly with aging populations, dementia for a number of people. It's obviously a big problem here. It's certainly a problem in Africa. We also see, we have seen in some of our travels, the lack of mental institutions and how villages deal with people who don't have the appropriate treatment around mental disease. It is sometimes horrifying what you observe and see. We have seen a lot of constraints, a lot of people being constrained because they can find no other way to control them. Many people, when some people get older, people have to work, they are pushed and forced out of their village. It is a concern of major import, and I do think it deserves a lot more attention than what development organizations have given it, and we probably should be approaching governments about dealing with mental health disease in a different way. It's really quite a substantial problem.
Thank you. Ms. Derrick, your organization is literally called the Bridges Institute. So do you have any additional thoughts on how one can bridge this gap between young African leaders and young American leaders on the matters of education for the purposes of building these sorts of networks to the benefit of both?
First, thank you. And I too have noted this Bridges, like the Bridges academies. I think that what we've already discussed, institutionalizing, codifying a relationship between African Americans and African of similar age is a logical way forward. But I want to put a note of caution. YALI is a remarkable program, and it's visionary, and it's capturing now maybe 1,000 to 5,000 people. But we need to be thinking about how we leverage YALI for wider educational transformation. One of the persons talked about the higher education needs. I've talked about the primary and secondary needs. YALI can be a trigger to help people think about this. We need to have national conversations about education, and YALI can certainly be a leadership component of that. And by bringing Americans of similar backgrounds and ages, then that helps strengthen and reinforce the bridges that you're talking about, that we're talking about. But let's not lose sight of the fact that education needs to be strengthened and transformed in Africa so that these young people that have very little hope feel that they can be retrained and find meaningful jobs and contribute to their communities.
Thank you. Let's go to our next round of questioners. Madam in the center, you have the floor.
My name is Jaime Ogobena. I represent Union of Oromo Evangelical Churches in America, and I'm originally from Ethiopia. I have two questions. I will try to be finishing 1 minute. One is there was a keynote, a word that would, said, done by the keynote speaker. We could not want it more than the government wanted. When you come from a country where the government doesn't represent you, where you have 99% of the National Assembly is one party, and how can the American policy can't go beyond the interest of the government?
Your second question.
And my second question is, there was a comment mentioned saying that we build new national culture, nation before ethnicity. That is a very sensitive issue for us. It is a very sensitive issue for me as a person. The more I got educated, the more ethnic-based I become. I'm from Ethiopia. I lived in there, but the more I learned the alienation, the disadvantage done on one ethnic group, you become more ethnic than more national. How can our policy in here will affect the people? Are we advocating the eradication of these ethnic groups, or are we promoting equality? Thank you.
Thank you. To the gentlelady on the left.
My name is Jennifer Gray Brumskin. I'm from New York. I was interning, African leadership intern in his office. My concern here is, one, the African American leadership in America. Two, the NGOs, like Care Africa. If you watch the presentation that was showing to us in this room, I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to watch that slideshow. Every one of the pictures on that slideshow depict poverty, extreme poverty in Africa. And that's what all the NGOs in Africa show. So it discourages the African American businesses and the African American leadership from going to Africa. I hope we can begin to show slideshows or pictures of Africa that will encourage the African Americans to want to go back to Africa. If I were African American, of course, I wouldn't want to go back to a place like that. To Care Africa. In terms of, I'm going to use Liberia as an example. You've been in Africa for 70 years. But I stand here as a Liberian, born in Liberia, raised in Liberia, current in Liberia. The United States Secretary of State, Linda Greenfield, just substantiated the fact that there is no running water in Liberia, there is no electricity. And I hope the Congressional Black Caucus, through Congresswoman Bass, because she just left from Liberia, will be able to bring development. You cannot have sustainable development in Africa today, places like Liberia, when there's no running water, no light. Care Africa talk about capacity building. Maybe I'm looking through a different lens, and Care Africa is looking through a different lens, but I haven't seen any impact. There's no hospital. There's no school in Liberia. So my question to Care Africa and to Bridge which I, for one, I don't want you in Liberia unless you're going to serve as a consultant.
Madam, may I ask you to
and
ask the question so that our questions have an opportunity
my
to
question
respond?
to you is, the educational infrastructure in Liberia is broken down. As bridge go there, what difference will you make so that 45,000 students will not take the university entrance and fail because of lack of primary education?
Thank you very much. Sir, you have the floor in a minute.
My name is Jacques Pahati. I'm a policy analyst with the Africa Faith and Justice Network. First question is U.S. policy regarding Africa, the support given to dictatorships. Africans are very smart. They are willing to do anything, but they are taken hostage, and the U.S. participates in that. You can read a recent report by Auckland Institute, the role of the United States government in land grab in Cameroon. And most of the land grab happening in Africa is huge, and the U.S. businesses are involved in that. How can we develop when interests from outside don't follow the rules and they are also corrupt? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And finally, a question from the left. Madam, you have the floor.
Hello, thank you. My name is Toby from the Embassy of Nigeria. I'd like to commend Ms. Adekpichu for her work with the women. The main thing, the key thing I think is, which we have reiterated, is that we cannot look at health and education in isolation from economic development. And I think that's very important to see that even with economic development, you can have job creation, wealth creation, and then you need to develop the infrastructure. So it comes back to infrastructure. But then it's also very important to remember that health and education and educational institutions are competitive. And so in view of what the countries who don't have the basic infrastructure, who have not yet developed the infrastructure, and who want to compete as well, where do they get the financing to be able to do all of this? Thank you.
Thank you. So let me thank all those questioners for their impassioned questions. Although this panel is focused on health and education, they raised some very important issues that I think demand a hearing and demand an answer. So let me ask to any of the panelists first. The questioner from Ethiopia had a very compelling question about the importance of that, not only of ethnicity and nationality, frankly, Ms. Derrick, challenging your view, but also asking this question, which hopefully the second panel will delve into. How can one reasonably hold a government accountable for questions of economic development on health, on education, if it is a government that clearly is not listening to its own people? I think the Assistant Secretary said that while the government of the United States can't want it more than a government, what happens when the government doesn't want development as badly as its people? And how do we address this? So let me open the floor to any of you who may have a question. Perhaps we can turn to our African panelists first. Dr. Karanja.
Let me just kick off remarks on that.
Can you speak directly to the microphone so they can hear you?
I think we have seen a lot of progress in Africa when it comes to democracy. We can look at the numbers. I don't have them with me right here, but we have a lot of elections happening. We have peaceful transitions happening in countries. There are some concerns because in recent years we've seen some countries change their constitutions, so their leaders are staying longer, and sometimes that involves also the diaspora. Now, from my perspective, I think what has been important, because we've worked so much on building public-private partnerships, and this is not just the public sector and the private, it's also including the NGO community, is the idea of enhancing accountability, not just at the national government, but also all the way down to the community level. I think in many countries have decentralized their power. You have more accountability for expenses and development down to the community level, and we are seeing examples like in Kenya that are working. However, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. Unless you have an informed public and you have these institutions that strengthen accountability and hold leaders accountable, it's going to be still very, very difficult to achieve the kinds of gains we want to achieve. It is sad, like what's happening, my sister was referring to her community, but ethnicity is a real danger in Africa. Just as we talk about racism here, back in Africa is ethnicity, is the tribe, it goes back to the tribe. And leaders divide people along their tribes so they can get votes. And I think it's a high time, and I see this happening as you see these young people growing up. They don't want any of that. It's a political baggage from the colonial system where they divided and ruled people, and that still continues in Africa. I think that's something we need to continue to deal with and focus on, because it's really dividing Africa and dividing countries and stealing away from the progress that we should be making.
Thank you. Ms. Adepeju.
So for me, I will say that an informed public, like he said, is essential. So really true, the American government can want it more than the government of the country, but everything still lies with having an informed public. So we have seen situations in Nigeria and across different African countries where the young people or people within the country use social media to ask or request or demand for accountability, to make the government do what they are supposed to do, or to force them to do that thing that they really ought to do. So we have seen the power of social media. We've seen a lot of things happen. We have seen pressure being placed on government. For instance, in Nigeria, the Bring Back Our Girls movement was just a hashtag on Twitter and forced government to begin to look critically at the terrorist group Boko Haram and take concrete action against defeating Boko Haram. So consistently, the American government can want it more than the African government, but then we understand that the power lies with the people. Then Yali is also a way in which the American government have been able to turn around that and put the American government in one place, which is why they are not really happy with many of the Yali fellows. For instance, I'm aware that when we went back after our fellowship, some fellows in Zimbabwe were stopped at the airports. They were frisked. Their computers were seized. They were detained there for hours because the government thought that they had come to the U.S. to be indoctrinated to topple their president. So those are the kind of things, the dynamics that comes into play. When you want to look at the situation, African government versus the American government, it is the people that will win. The power lies with the people. When the people realize the power they hold, the African government will no longer be able to hold anybody to ransom. And I think they are really scared of that.
Thank you. Mr. Mellon, can I ask you about the impassioned question from our Liberian colleague? Africare has been in Africa for nearly 50 years. And as I understand her question, so what? And not only for Africare, but frankly for the large number of NGOs and frankly other official U.S. Development agencies from a number of countries that are still working on development multiple generations later, and in many cases, I think, as she would argue, from Liberia with precious little progress. So how do you respond to the question of so what?
I heard the question, and I certainly saw with you the passion with which it was asked. And what I can say is, where we work, we can measure the difference we're making. We are not everywhere. We cannot be everywhere. And it is not, and I'll say this, and it may sound harsh, but I don't mean it to be the way it sounds. It is not the responsibility of people from somewhere else to fix your problem. Our job as an NGO is to help people build their own communities. We learn a few things, and we've learned a few things doing business for 46 years. We know the people to talk to. We know how they live. We know where they live. We know some things to do, and we know some things not to do. That has given us, as an NGO, some legitimacy in lots of geographies in Africa. It's also given us and helped us to help those communities develop an expertise. But we are not the be-all and the end-all. We are simply one more and an individual NGO trying to go about the business of helping others help themselves. If it is not perfect, that is not my fault. But I need that energy and that passion, when that question was asked, in the programs we do, in the communities we serve. As I said to you earlier, one of the strategies we have is the Center of Excellence approach, the hub of excellence. Because when you have excellent service delivery, you create demand. And I have oodles of examples. There was a program in Uganda where we were able to build the Infectious Diseases Institute, but at the time, there were not antiretrovirals to be sent. And on Monday, they were only done 1 day a week. So I went to the clinic on a Monday, and the people were sitting around, and they were sad and not talking. It was very quiet in the clinic. But I went back on Tuesday, people were playing cards and checkers, and it was a completely different experience. So I asked one of the nurses at the clinic, what's the difference in what I saw yesterday and today? She said, well, today, the people here are on ARTs, antiretrovirals. The people yesterday were not. So my job, I saw very quickly, was turning every day into a Tuesday. I needed to do that with the help of the Ugandan government and all of the other NGO partners, so that now, at the IDI, antiretrovirals are distributed 6 days a week. We have expanded that to all 13 Kampala city clinics, and with some associated clinics in rural districts, serving now over 90,000 people. That was done with the partnership of the US government. That was done with the partnership of Makerere University. It was done with the partnership of Malago Hospital, all in Uganda. We can solve lots of problems together. Together we can do that. And as I've said many times, sometimes we partner with people we might not otherwise want to get to the goal that we're trying to achieve. As an NGO head, as my first time heading up an NGO here at Africare, I'm not married to the ideology. I want to do what works. And the people help me figure out what works. So I'm sorry that the questioner hasn't seen any progress in Liberia, but I know that is not true. That is statistically false. We are not everywhere, but where we are, we're doing a pretty good job.
Thank you very much. Before I go to the final two questioners, let me address the final question from the previous group. None of you on this panel is a representative of the government of the United States of America. And I'm not either anymore. Yet, our brother from Cameroon asked a compelling question, one that we often hear, which is, why does the government of the United States support dictators, and why does it aid and abet corruption? That is a challenging question with which some may take issue. Nevertheless, it is an important one and a valid one. So if anyone here on the panel has any issues they'd like to address it, let me invite you to do so.
Should have asked that with Ambassador Greenfield.
It's a government question.
So everyone's saying it's a government question. So there we go. So we'll go to this one. Would you wish to address it? Please,
No,
go
I don't
ahead.
want to address that, but I wanted to address.
Oh, please, of course, please.
So I really feel for the questioner from Ethiopia, and also from Liberia, and Ethiopia has its own challenges. But I've just come back from Rwanda, and whatever you think about the government of Rwanda, one thing that they have done very, very well is the reconciliation after the genocide. When you go and you see the testimony of people, and you understand what children are being taught in school, you know that it is possible for people to come together. Children are taught in school that we are all Rwandans. They don't talk about being Hutu or Tutsi. Also in Rwanda, there's this wonderful story of a woman who returned from Uganda, who had been a nurse, and when she came back, she started a hair salon. And so as women came in to have their hair done, they'd start to talk, women from all ethnic groups. And then as they talked, she decided, maybe they should start a soccer league. So they started a women's soccer league, and now that has been expanded, and there's a national women's soccer league. All of this, it gives people an opportunity to talk and see the other. We don't want there to be other genocides, surely, but we do want civil society to be able to reach across ethnic lines and have joint NGO and other social activities that they do together. For Liberia, I was in Liberia from 1973 to 1977, teaching at the University of Liberia, so some of these questions on Liberia have truly resonated. But there has been progress in Liberia, particularly in terms of education. But the frustration that one can feel there is so strong, and it's going to take so long that that's why they're deciding to go out and do the private sector social investment. So to the woman from Liberia, also, I understand your frustration, and you see what these years have, the 10 years have had some successes, but not as much as you would like. But be patient and continue to contribute and continue to have dialogue with people of every ethnic group in Liberia as well.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left in this session. Let us go to our final two questioners, and my plead for brevity in your questions so we can open the time.
Good afternoon. My name is Regina.
Can't hear you. The mic.
My name is Regina.
Something. Can we ask the sound people of the mic?
Regina. Her name is Regina.
I know, but guys, we're 20 else here. Go ahead,
Okay.
please.
So I'll try to form this as best as I can. I've heard a lot of words.
The microphone is not on. Can we actually see what we can do? We have one coming over from the other side. Here we go.
Okay, my name is Regina. So I've heard a lot of words today, such as institution, innovation. I can't think of the other word, but my question is directly to Ms. Adepiju, and also for the members of the board. I know that you can't have effective relationships without, or effective growth without relationships of institutions, governments, and innovators. So how can we, get resources directly to an innovator like Ms. Adepiju, and help her business grow? And for Ms. Adepiju, what kind of investments and resources do you feel you need to help your business grow? Can you use the resources and investments from the people that you're sitting on this panel with, or do you want more direct investment from the people in your community?
Thank you very much. And to our final question.
Yes, my name is Dashan Farad. I'm a reporter for YourBlackWorld.net. And I wanted to ask, actually no particular speaker, but maybe you might want to tackle this. Do any of you support the Obama administration's effort, or I should say the plan to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, a man who arguably was the biggest advocate of what people were saying in terms of African infrastructure, Pan-Africanism, and many have said that he was actually fulfilling the vision of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Do any of you support the administration's, once again, initiative to help lead his overthrow?
Thank you. Maybe go to, in the interest of time, to Ms. Adepiju on the question of resources. So from your experience, very quickly, how can we get resources to innovators, to entrepreneurs such as you who need the most?
So I think that, yes, I would like more investment from my own community, because really simple life-saving solutions that has community at the center of it are the ones that are most sustainable, because the people are able to own the innovation and own, whatever it is you are bringing into the community because of the simple or basicness of the innovation or intervention. So we have seen Yali set an example for many African billionaires and millionaires. So we have, for instance, in Nigeria, saying Tony Elumelu Foundation rise up to say that they want to invest $1 billion in African entrepreneurs, across a period of 3 years. So I know that the U.S. government's investment in young African leaders is also spurring other people within the African continent to invest in their own people. Because the logic is simple. If the U.S. government can invest in you, can invest in your business, your innovation, that means that there's something in you we are not seeing, and maybe we should start looking deeply into the people within our own community. The help does not always have to come from outside. The help should also come from inside. Because from inside we grow to become, the beautiful flowers that we are, to come out, and showcase ourselves. So really, I think that yes, more investment is needed, but the investment should come from African leaders or African people who have, been successful in Africa. The principle is very simple: send the ladder back down.
Thank you. And I will take the prerogative of the chair to suggest that the question about Muammar Gaddafi is not consistent with this particular panel on African health and education and infrastructure. And as we are directly right on time, thank you all very much. Let me join me in thanking the panelists for their participation. Thank you very much.
Let's have another round of applause for just an outstanding panel. Thank you so much.